Hi, and welcome to the AP Biology Lab 11 Animal Behavior Lab. This lab has two parts to it. In the first part, you watch fruit flies and you look at their mating behavior, and you can see a number of different things. The male will try to copulate with the female, but he sings a song, and there's a lot of things and I'll get to that in just a second. The other major lab portion of this is sometimes referred to as the isopod or the pill bug or the roly-poly lab. Essentially what you have is an isopod, something like this, and we find them under rocks living around our house. And what you'll do is give them a treatment. And so in other words, we'll have a choice chamber where they can have a dry side or they can have a wet side. And so what I'm going to do is add a video right now to the bottom, and that's going to be a lab that I ran with some pill bugs that I just gathered, and we'll let them go as the podcast plays, and then you can take a look at what they do. So on one side we have the wet side, and on the other side we have the dry, and so now they have to make a choice between the two. Okay, so ethology down at the bottom is the study of animal behavior, and you can imagine this is a pretty huge discipline, but the two things we're going to concentrate on this lab are going to be the idea of kinesis and taxis. Now they both are the same thing. They're response to a stimuli. In other words, if you move towards heat, or you move towards light, or you move towards the smell of like rotting flesh, that's a response to that stimuli. But the two ways that we do that are different. Taxis is when we make a directional response. In other words, if we smell something and we move right towards it or right away from it, that's going to be taxis. Kinesis is different. Kinesis is when you just move randomly. And so, for example, if I was addicted to chocolate, I would randomly move about really, really quickly until I bumped into chocolate, and then my motion is going to slow down. If I was showing taxis towards chocolate, then I would simply move towards it. And so as you're watching the pill bugs at the bottom, you should always be thinking, are they showing taxis or are they showing kinesis? Are they randomly moving around and then just kind of calming down when they find that thing they like, or are they just searching it out? Okay, but before we get there, let's talk about fruit fly courtship. And I actually started here. We've got John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever, and I think I might have a little selection from that. Let's see if I can play this. I don't know if you can hear that. Okay, so in this poster here, John Travolta is playing the role of that male fruit fly. He's dancing and he's performing in the hopes of being able to court the female. So how does this work in fruit flies? There's no music, there's no disco, but it works in the same way. So first of all, the male will approach the female. He'll then vibrate one of his wings, making a song. And so he rapidly moves it back and forth. He'll follow her around, and sometimes he'll lick her genitalia from behind. Now she has a choice. She can either reject him or she can accept him. And so if she accepts him, then they'll copulate. And here's a picture of them copulating. And they'll do this for maybe 20 or 30 minutes. And he puts a number of sperm in, and then that's going to fertilize eggs, and then pretty soon we have a lot of fruit flies. And so just by watching those, and there's some great videos of fruit fly courtship. If you really want to see how this looks in video, YouTube's got some great videos of that, and so you can check it out. But let's get to the other lab. The lab that I'm talking about requires a choice chamber. And so you can buy those. Here's some that are provided at Carolina. But we just made our own. And so this is what it looks like. It's just two Petri dishes, and then those Petri dishes are glued together. And then they have a lid. And so you can put different treatments in either one. So for example, we could put wet on this side, and we could put dry on this side, or we could put wet on this side and wet on that side, and it could act as a control. And so in this lab, what we're doing is we're putting wet on one side of the choice chamber and then dry on the other, and then there's a little tunnel in the middle, and so the pill bugs can, if they don't get out, they can move back and forth between the two, and then they decide on the one that they like. So how do we keep track of that data? We just simply record where they are. And so looking at this chart, this would be at time 0. Remember, we started with 5 on one side and then 5 on the other. And then simply we just count. So every 30 seconds, for example, after 30 seconds there were 6 on one side, 4 on the other, 8 on the one side, 2 on the other. And you can see here that it looks like they were spending more time, and this is in the video that I'm showing you, more time on the wet side. And so when we're done, graphing this is pretty simple. We just do a histogram. And so what we're doing is we're doing a bar graph. And so this is the average. It looks like it's close to 9 number of pill bugs that were on the wet side, and then this is the dry side, and it looks like there's just 1, something like that. A little over 1. And so what do we want to do? Well, in general, we want to jump ahead and say, oh, they clearly enjoy the wet side over the dry side. But science, you don't say that. You don't say like that our data proves that or our data shows that. We have to have some kind of a statistical analysis, and then even when we do, we don't say proves, we say suggests or implies. And so, well, let's talk about chi-squared. I'll do another podcast on chi-squared, so I'll actually sort through some data. But we should think about the values that we would get. So let's say that this was, if we were to just be wet on one side and wet on the other. In other words, let's say that there was no advantage on being on one side or the other. What would the average, what would we expect the average to be? Well, it'd just be like flipping a coin. In other words, when we flip the coin, half of the time we'd get heads, half the times we would get tails. And so the expected value should be 5 and 5. But the observed values in this case are going to be closer to 9 and 1. And so there's a few penalties we have to pay for the sample size. But what you do is use degrees of freedom, and we try to figure out, you know, does the data suggest that they enjoyed the wet side over the dry side? And we use something called a null hypothesis. But if all those things seem foreign to you, make sure you watch the podcast on chi-squared. And aside from that, that's ethology, and that's the Pill Bug Lab.